presenting with a mother of an individual who was diagnosed several years ago and who is currently enrolled in one of our first programs. We've worked together to kind of talk through the story and journey and experience and try to highlight and pull out some of the things that seem to provide some really great information for teams to hear from an actual family member's perspective about things that were the most helpful and areas that, you know, we can focus on more in our future works. As we go through the presentation today, just as a reminder that we'll probably use family pretty typically, but we will actually be talking about friends and family. So a very inclusive term, not limited to blood relatives only. And we're going to be chatting a little bit about through this particular family's journey of learning, coping, understanding, growing, you know, and bearing in mind about how important it is to truly involve those who support the clients who are in any of our first episode programs. And when we don't do our due diligence to involve families, we're really doing a direct disservice to our clientele. So I'm going to go ahead and pass the reins.
Okay. Good afternoon. I'm delighted to be here. Danelle and I chose some images having to do with water, and I hope you'll see how they are maybe appropriate and helpful. So as a family member, I'd like to say that I'll be offering my experience as a personal one. This is not meant to be exhaustive in scope, and so while I recognize that these experiences are in some ways unique to me and my family, perhaps there are enough universal features within them as to be of benefit to you as clinicians and to the clients and families that you serve. We chose the image of a tidal wave because it builds for some time before breaking on the shore. As with the tidal wave, there had been for us a time of buildup with nebulous dread, concern, and some chaos. It began to get focused when our tidal wave reached the shore, which is analogous to the time of presenting to the first team. As background, I felt it was necessary to include a little bit of a thumbnail sketch of what we'd been through. Again, this is not exhaustive. When my son graduated from college, having studied economics and witnessing the 2008 Wall Street-induced crash, for which apparently no one would be punished, he became a political activist and traveled across the country on his motorcycle. Once on the West Coast, he participated in many protests, was imprisoned on many misdemeanor charges, and although always nonviolent, he was put in solitary confinement for 24 hours when he tried to organize a hunger strike in jail. Gradually, he began to live on the streets, associated with an increasingly alienated crowd, with more robust drug experimentation, a decline in his personal hygiene, and more often out of reach of his family. We tried to help with trips out to the West Coast. We encouraged contact with a family member who lived out there who agreed to accept packages for him. His father and I had different levels of worry throughout this time. Dad was more inclined to think that a male has a right to self-determination and there was nothing wrong. I was attempted to organize an intervention with the help of LACADA, but with Dad's stance, we were advised not to proceed. A shift in location to the streets of Detroit brought our son closer to us, but he still insisted on squatting in an abandoned building, thinking that he was saving the people of Detroit from the injustices of the world. He had a long-term relationship with a woman while there, which was of some hope to us, but with the breakup of that relationship, what was left of his center would not hold. He asked to come home in September of 2016 and was frankly psychotic. At home, he was yelling at the skies, fighting demons that were invisible to us, unable to sleep. He would stand still on the curb in our town as his delusion instructed him to guard the less fortunate. The culmination of a nightmare had gone from bad to worse, and at this point, it was really hard to find my son inside this person who was yelling at beings we cannot see, who was restless, preoccupied, and self-isolating. A family friend, who is a participant in NAMI herself, suggested the first program, of which I had not heard. And so I called. We entered the system, daring to hope that someone could help. Okay, just going. Okay, so here's our first slide. We call this sort of phase one. And so here we are presenting to the Community Mental Health Center, to the first team. Thinking back, there are some very vivid memories of responses which we found really helpful. So this slide holds an overview of those early responses. Each of the bullet points on the right will be expanded upon for ease of recognition and explanation. I believe you'll also have the slides if you'd like them. First, a few basic practicalities mattered a lot. So there's the first bullet point. Oh, the top says basic practicalities. Okay. There was a very prompt response to our initial call. As you're aware, to make that first call takes a lot of guts, it takes a lot of courage, and it just takes a lot. So there was a nice voicemail and a nice initial response that was prompt. There was also, as I recall, a prompt appointment made, so you don't have to make the call and then wait for 2 weeks. Working with HIPAA, I remember the intake, and this was not a first team person, but rather a community mental health worker who was asking him, well, you know, now that you're coming here, which he didn't really want to be there, but who is it that you'd like to have, can learn about what's going on, however they ask it. And he said, no one. But the problem is that he's psychotic. He doesn't have his phone on because he's afraid they're spying on him. He's not aware of the calendar dates at all or what day of the week it is, and he could not walk to any appointments himself. It would have been a deal breaker if the person managing HIPAA had said, sorry, family cannot be involved. So the woman finessed it a bit, saying, well, how about your parents? No. How about someone else? No. Well, how about mom? No, because I was sitting right there with him. And then we sort of finessed it to, how about mom for appointments? And to that he agreed. Since then, just FYI, he has agreed to have both parents involved, but it did take some time. The next item is to have an introductory packet for families, and I believe you do. It's a little hard for me to remember, actually. But one of the things that I would strongly recommend being included with this packet is, aside from the first information about how to reach NAMI, and that won't be exactly immediately apparent that that's something we would need, but it is. And then I remember a yellow sheet that is, I'm labeling CIT, which was informative in that it was telling me that there were crisis intervention trained officers. This was put out by NAMI, it was yellow, and we were still having interactions with the police and the sheriff's offices. It was good to know several things, that there are officers specifically trained in the art of de-escalation of a crisis, and that they would want to know that he is never armed, he has never been violent, and that if they found him on the street or annoying someone in the community, that he does have family who will come if they would call us. And to, excuse me, and also to tell them that he was under the care of the mental health clinic. I actually also made a trip to the police in town to talk with them proactively during a non-crisis time to explain who he was, who his parents were, and to please call us. They were marvelous, absolutely marvelous. So I recommend, if the situation fits, for families to be proactive with law enforcement. Also with neighbors. Initially, I was embarrassed and ashamed to have my son acting the way he was, but after a little while, I did ask my neighbors. I said, if you see my son doing something and it bothers you, please let me know so that I can help work with it, okay? Next one is called Empathy and Education. It feels like the Twilight Zone for a while, and I think it would be helpful to say to family, you know, this feels like the Twilight Zone, no doubt, and it may be the hardest part. I didn't know that was the way it felt to me, that it wouldn't always stay like this was nice. And I think the team actually does end up saying this, but this idea that your son is in there might be helpful. Because I couldn't recognize this person who is acting this way, and it was pretty frightening and alien to me. There was always a general acknowledgement of the family's efforts to get him there. It's never easy, I imagine. It wasn't for us. And the team is marvelous. The idea that you folks have continuity and that you're going to help us navigate the system is priceless. I think initially, early on, it's also helpful to sort of have a way to offer a brief overview. When Danelle and I were talking about this, of the stress vulnerability model, because what I had, and I'm sort of educated in healthcare actually, but what I had was mostly stigma in my mind. Here we go, you know. So a few words about no fault, a few words about the stress vulnerability model, but I wouldn't have been able to digest a whole lecture on it. But some brief words would have been nice. Number 3, the title is Hope. Yeah, to actually say that recovery is possible is a message that I take great hope in. It helps us to know that recovery is possible, because really, unless you're in the field, the stigma is still strong. And that's kind of all I had in my heart and mind. Oh, and then the second bullet here is, I thought that the team was happy to have us there, but I thought it was mostly because they had good manners. You know, how nice of you to bring him. You know, we're happy to see you. You know, this is nice. And I just when I've discovered over the course of the last year and a half that the ongoing family or friend involvement really, really does help the client regain their best mental health over time. To actually specifically hear those words helps us stay connected, because some of the experiences are pretty harrowing. Okay, next. Family self-care. I just want to say, in case you doubt, accepting phone calls and listening to emails is of little use. I want to say it is of incredible importance. This is a very isolating experience to go through. I can hardly talk to my mother sometimes about this, let alone my neighbors or some of my friends. It's okay, some it's not. But to be able to call the team or send off an email describing what's been happening is absolutely, absolutely important. Not only are we building rapport and trust, but it lessens isolation and lessens the anxiety here. Let's see. There's the encouragement again to attend NAMI support or education groups. I have attended the NAMI support group regularly in our area, and I've also taken the family-to-family education course. Those are two different things, as you know, but I can recognize a shift in myself from being agitated to becoming more accepting. And I see this in others in the group as well. I think, for instance, NAMI has a little exercise in their training where you are trying to listen to something while there are people standing around you speaking at you. It was a very powerful experience it was to simulate the experience of somebody who might be hearing voices. Similarly, there's an Anderson Cooper video where you get to realize how difficult it is for your loved one to actually go through this illness. And I've also had glimpses of wisdom and difficulties from other families. You know, how sometimes, and this is interesting, how sometimes we can do a lot in caring for our loved one, but the individual with the illness will still make their own choices for better or worse. How difficult it is to be heard if the client is hospitalized, which helped us know we wanted to avoid that if we could, and how the continuity of caregivers can get lost. Lastly, I'll say too that I started to realize how many people in the community are facing these and similar problems. This has frankly made me a more compassionate person. You know, it's living in the midst of the human condition is really difficult. Let us count the ways, right? Okay, and then as Danelle and I were talking, I recognized there was sort of a different phase of the process, and we called it sort of getting our sea legs. And I think I would say this goes from crisis to learning the ropes. And I would say the beginning of this actually starts, next one. Yeah, so we're still puzzled on the left, the family experience. We're still puzzled, like, what is this? But we have more energy to learn. It took 6 months for us to get to this second phase when he agreed to take his medication. So his behavior started to settle a bit, and instead of being in raw crisis, we were able to have a little bit more energy. Again here, each bullet on the right has an expansion slide so that you can attempt to see the details so that it's as clear as possible. Okay. All right. So this is the goals versus values. And I think it was very puzzling to us to have the question come up like, what is your son's goals? Or to him, what are your goals? Because the goals that came up were from his delusions. So if he wants to be the third eye and to be known as the third eye and to save the world so it's safe for the children, well, now what? You know, how do we work with that? He's not interested in a job. He's not interested in socializing better or even feeling better. And so what do we have to offer him? I've come to learn that there are ways to address this, like to hear beneath the delusions to the values. He has always been a really, really compassionate and empathic person, to respond to the client's feelings, which is really difficult when you don't recognize this person in front of you and you just wish you would stop it. I'll say that for myself. And it's also really, it takes a lot of skill to do, to address the delusions in a way that's helpful to him and to everybody. Okay, ongoing accessibility and kindness. I don't want to beat this horse here, but it is so important all along. This being available for calls and emails is really powerful for me. We've had several crises, like, you know, when he wasn't eating for a couple days, did that mean that he was sort of harming himself? His father had the idea that it would be good for him to go back live in Detroit, homeless. And that was a crisis. And I think the team continues to model how to find silver linings in dark clouds and how to share delight when there are glimpses of joy and humor, because they are there as well. Okay, and sort of speaking of which, excuse me, I see the improvements and I see the disappointments, and so this idea that healing is nonlinear is really important. You know, it's not like we're healing a cut in the skin and it's always going forward and getting better. So setbacks are likely. This is something that we sort of learned the hard way. And it seems as soon as you sort of get a nice day, a good day, and hope for sort of recognizing your son, well, then here comes a setback. Oh, dang. It's very easy to lose perspective as a parent and to sort of get some despair and some frustration. And so the team has been wonderful. It's like, hang in there, look how far we've come, and let's see what we can do about this setback right now. The team is fabulous. And then the second bullet, peers in recovery can help family and friends keep perspective. So I found it very inspiring and helpful when a colleague gave me some links to videos. What is the name of those?
They're probably from On Track New York.
Is that right? On Track New York, we think. Okay, so there are some videos out there of adults who are in recovery and who can speak eloquently about that process. And that I found to be quietly reassuring for me. And then I would also say, and I know there aren't a lot of peer supports from FIRST programs around the state yet, but if they're available, man, I would jump. I would make sure, not only for me, but for my son, if he could access a peer support specialist, I'd drive across the mountains to get him to one. Okay, there are any mountains. Okay, sorry, I come from Pennsylvania. Flexibility. So each family is unique, I am sure. So for instance, the team we've had is fabulous in that my son balks at returning to the community center because for more frequent visits. So the blessing of a social worker decided she would be able to come to meet him in our town in McDonald's. He treasures those visits, and I know it's a favor from the FIRST team to allow her to do that, but it has kept him engaged in like sort of almost nothing else has. And then in terms of the client's interests and strengths, my son's fluency in Spanish has remained untouched by his disease. Absolutely fascinating to me. So we're working with the team to see if we can get him involved in some volunteer work now with the Spanish language as part of it. And then the unique aspects of the family and friends, I don't need to remind you of this, but my son's parents are divorced. I'm divorced from my ex. And we're not always on the same page or even in the same chapter. So the team lead for us has been really wise and wonderful to meet with us separately from our son to help ensure a decent foundation on which to build the family support. And I'm going to call her a saint. So there. Okay. And then the chapter, this is the phase that I'm still in, and we called it What's on the Horizon. I see you'll appreciate that the C is still there. Let's see, so we've reached some stability and some things feel better, but with some new awareness comes some new concerns. Now the following two slides are kind of packed densely, and I apologize for that, but here we go. You'll have this later. So the family experiences, and this slide is entitled Anxieties. So the family experience on the left, I'm going to go down this and sort of talk about sort of how bigger questions are popping up. So our anxieties include sort of a general exhaustion with the chronicity. Our son is going back and forth to each parent's home. His father is remarried, so there's some discomfort there of the new spouse. We have to coordinate a schedule of transporting him. He is still psychotic some hours of each day, I have no doubt, and I'm sure of it. He has little insight into having this illness. There's always this sort of underneath sense of like, should we be doing more? I guess that's the second one down. And it would be, sorry, back in the first box, we long to have a handle on his prognosis and the long-term trajectory. There is this message that we hear that the longer he is in psychosis, I'm sorry, I don't know what DUP is.
Duration of untreated psychosis.
Oh,
sorry.
Oh, okay. The longer he is in DUP means that the less likely he is to recover. And so when I see him being psychotic still on medication, I worry, like, is this hopeless? And so I go back and forth between seeing some improvement and then thinking, this is a done deal. So that's a little confusing. Let's see. Oh yes, and so bigger questions on the left-hand side all the way down to bottom. Concerns about his social skills and other support. He does not have friends, or he trusts the wrong people. We're concerned about what happens over the long haul about his independence. And then, his parents are in their 60s, and so we worry about what's going to happen when we can't do this any longer. So over on the right-hand side, I understand, we're aware, we've sort of reminded that this is a marathon, not a sprint. It's hard for you to be getting these questions about, well, what's the prognosis? What's the prognosis? Because I know it's not a science. And my apologies for keep keeping asking the question. Let's see. Oh yeah, just a helpful approach. One of the things that I've actually done is sought some legal advice about special needs trusts. And that may be outside of your responsibility, but just so you know that a lot of families are worried about, what if I die and he can't handle, if he had $20, he'd blow it on stuff he shouldn't have, let alone having a little bit of an inheritance. So that's on our minds. And then the title of this slide is Joys.
Yes.
Hopefulness. I'm sorry, I can't see it on there. So the small steps are really monumental, and the team has shared the joys with us. It's so helpful. So a few joys, for instance, are he agrees to go to the dentist. His hygiene is improving. He takes his medication, and he has given his word that he will, and he's doing it on his own. He volunteers for 4 hours a week. His mother takes him, I take him to Second Harvest, and we repack boxes together, and his dad takes him to the community service center, and they do similar things. He goes to church with his dad. They do drumming. He asked to attend an art class in the community and was religious about attending it. He responds to compassion at his grandfather's funeral in December. I keep trying to reteach him basic skills like shopping. And I guess, yeah, so we have sort of found a lot of these community things ourselves. I don't know if the first team in other areas sort of have a list of places where people can volunteer and be sort of understood. And maybe the parents could bring those to you, actually, so that you have them. And I would still be happy to have more education about how to communicate with him when he tells me things like, he's made a new kind of creature in his computer game in his mind. I don't know quite what to say to that anymore. And anyway, so I think this is the end of where I speak. And I just want to say this is a lot of ground to have covered in the last 20 minutes. I'm honored to have been given this opportunity to speak with you all. I applaud everything you're doing. It's my hope that these words will be of benefit to us all as we continue to engage in this vital work.
Thank you so much. So just a couple of takeaways to think about, and so appreciate you putting in all that work. I think presenting is one thing, presenting about a personal story is a whole different ball of wax, so appreciate that. But some of the things that sort of stood out for me as a provider, as a consultant, working with you folks, is that a little kindness can go a long way. We do that often, and we just wanted to reinforce what an impact that made on this family, as well as ensuring that families are aware that they have a direct impact on client outcomes. So again, that, there is literature behind the role of the family and what you do as a family, the information that you're aware of, what you know to look out for with triggers and warning signs. Being very explicit about their role and about how that can impact outcomes is, I think, vital. Something that was said to me actually by our mom who presented today was, "Is this my life forever?" And it struck me because I thought, oh yeah, sure, we know that this is a client's concern most of the time. But she said, no, for me, for myself, this was my thought, is this my life forever? And I think always keeping that in mind, that that's not limited just to those who are individuals that we see on our caseloads. So small steps are big, and the journey does seem long. And so, the other quote that really stuck out in my mind was, "Do I dare have hope as a family member?" And I think our biggest job, and one that we are happy to do, is reminding that, positive outcomes and a good prognosis are more common than we readily think when we hear the word schizophrenia or first episode psychosis. And so the more that we remind ourselves of the hope and the literature that's out there to support that, the easier it becomes to sort of make sure that families are aware of this as well. This is where we can do our best work. So before we get into questions and discussions, we're going to go ahead and stop the recording.